pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers fly!
Flight downside of speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the NASA Spaceflight broadcast of today's Starlink mission. You are looking live at Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is set to set a new reuse record, launching its 10th mission for booster 1051 on today's Starlink mission. My name is Thomas Burkhardt. I'm an editor and reporter for NASA Spaceflight, and we are joined out in the field at Cape Canaveral by Assistant Managing Editor Chris Gebhardt. Chris, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine myself. Thomas, how are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you out there. We've also got back here in the studio Michael Baylor. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing well and hoping to see a 10th flight of a Falcon 9 for the first time this evening or this morning, depending on where you're watching from.
Absolutely. And then also out in the field in the Cape Canaveral area, we've also got Julia Bergeron. Julia, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
All right, so that's the NASA Spaceflight team for today's broadcast. Liftoff today is set for 2:44 a.m. Eastern Time, 0644 UTC. And today's mission will be the 10th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1051. This is the first time a Falcon 9 will fly, Falcon 9 first stage will fly its 10th flight. Also using a pair of reused fairing halves on today's flight, so lots of reused hardware. After liftoff from pad 40 at Cape Canaveral, the first stage will be making a landing attempt on Just Read the Instructions. And overall, a pretty standard Starlink launch profile, another 60 Starlink satellites headed to low Earth orbit this morning. As with all of our NASA Spaceflight broadcasts, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those into chat, and if you tag us with @NASASpaceflight, we'll be able to pull those in, and we'll try to answer those as we approach today's launch. Again, we're just about 50 minutes away from today's launch right now, and the countdown will be getting underway closer to about minus 35 minutes, so we've got some time before the pre-launch events start kicking off. So again, if you've got those questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll try to answer those as we get through closer to the liftoff. Right off the bat, we got a couple super chats coming in. Really quick, want to thank you guys for the support. Rough Riders Show, thank you so much. We actually have a question about the previous Starlink mission, asking what is taking booster 1049 so long to return to port. So Julia, our resident fleet expert, what's going on with the return to port from the more recent Starlink mission?
Well, that's a valid question, right? Because as we all saw on the live stream, that sure looked like a bullseye landing. Thing is, there seemed to be a little bit of weather. The weather forecast did say moderate for landing, and indeed it did prove to be moderate. It took them a while to get the boosters secured. Usually that means that the seas are too rough for personnel to board. So Octograbber is a robot, but it still does need some human aid or human eyes on board in order to safely safe the booster for the return home. They did start heading back, and then they hit another squall, so they were only going about 3.5, 4 knots for a little while there. They're past the squall, and it looks like they should be back in the morning, hopefully with an upright, beautiful booster that has flown 9 times.
Sounds good. And on that weather front, we should talk about the weather forecast for today. The 45th Space Wing predicted a 80% chance of favorable weather, and so far we've heard no items as far as weather being a concern for liftoff today, and pretty low risk for booster recovery and things like that. So weather sounding good on the forecast. Chris, you're out there in the field. How's the weather looking for launch this morning? I think we might have lost Chris on comms. We'll get him back in a second. But again, that weather forecast looked good.
Oh, sorry,
there he
yes.
is.
I heard you start talking about it, but then I heard it go silent my end. My apologies.
Yeah, so we're just asking, how's the weather looking down in Cape Canaveral right now? We know the forecast was looking favorable for this morning.
Oh, yes, it's very, very nice. The 80% chance of acceptable ground weather conditions here at the Cape have definitely materialized. It's a crystal clear sky. In fact, very excited to most likely be able to show you the entry burn as well of the first stage this morning.
Excellent. We'll be keeping an eye out for that, of course. A couple more super chats, and we'll get some questions in here as well. 5-star GJ with the Thomas fan club. Thank you so much. Future Martian with the super chat. Let's watch history be made tonight. Go B1051. Thank you, Future Martian. Axie, go Internet Rocket, go, absolutely. And Indie Fan with the new membership. Thank you all so much for all the support. Let's see, we got a question here from Marisk asking why don't they land the boosters for these missions on land? Chris, can you tell us a little bit about what goes into those decisions, where they're landing these boosters?
Yeah, so the Falcon 9s are capable of landing both on land in what's known as a return to launch site, landing where they would fly themselves back to the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station or Vandenberg Air Force Base out in California, depending on where they're launching from. But just because they can do that doesn't mean that for every mission that is permissible. Because the big thing that you have to consider, or that SpaceX has to consider in how they recover the booster, is the mass of the payload and where it's going. And basically that dictates how much propellant you have to reserve inside the second stage. And then that tells you how much propellant you have to burn in your first stage. And when the propellant levels allow for the booster to turn itself around and do what's known as the boost back burn to begin flying itself back to the launch site, they will do that whenever possible. But for some missions, it's just not possible. There isn't enough propellant left in the first stage to do that boost back burn, plus the entry burn, plus the landing burn. So that pretty much dictates that you have to continue outward into the Atlantic on that trajectory that you're on at stage separation, and then do the entry and landing burn and aim for the drone ship. So that's why the Starlinks go to the drone ships, because the payload mass of 16 metric tons total right now for the 60 Starlink satellites or thereabout is about the maximum that a Falcon 9 can do from a payload to orbit perspective and still be recoverable, even on the drone ship. So they even cut it pretty close on the Starlink missions. And that's actually why we haven't really seen them go beyond the 60 at a time on a Falcon 9. They can actually squeeze a bit more in there from a payload fairing volume standpoint, but you would then risk not having enough margin to recover the first stage. So that is what dictates where they land.
Gotcha. And some more questions in the queue here. Ron Watkins asking, how many boosters do they now have in the inventory? I've actually got the list in front of me now. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 Falcon 9 boosters that have flown missions and awaiting future missions. Actually, I should say 9 boosters because 2 of those are Falcon Heavy side boosters. Still not sure exactly what the fate of those may be. But 7 of those dedicated Falcon 9s. You've got booster 1049 on its way back to Port Canaveral after the Starlink L25 mission. We're looking at booster 1051 on pad 40 ready to launch tonight. And then they've got 1058, 1060, 61, 62, and 63 all preparing for future flights coming up. And that kind of rounds out their inventory. There's also some new boosters coming down the pipeline. 3 cores for the USSF 44 Falcon Heavy mission in a few months here, potentially as early as this summer. And then booster 1067, which will be a Falcon 9 debuting on the CRS 22 mission. So a couple new boosters that will be joining the fleet over the next several months as well. A question here from Musical Wolves asks, if it lands, will it be longer processing since it's getting reflown more time? So can we expect some longer turnaround time for booster 1051, assuming it lands successfully?
Each booster would do 10 flights, and after 10 flights, you would need minimal refurbishment between those flights. But once you got to 10, you needed to stop and do a bit more extensive inspections of your weld lines, of your tank structures, non-destructive evaluations of the overall booster, getting into places that you don't normally get into during normal turnaround flows. And this is all designed so you keep an eye on safety, especially as the Falcon 9s are flying more and more and more and more and more as fleet leaders, and those numbers and the number of flights each booster has is increasing. They're wanting to make sure that they're learning everything they can, that they're understanding how the stresses and the dynamics of not just the flight and the landing, but all that time it spends in the really corrosive saltwater air, right, as it's being towed back to port from the ocean, that's not the best environment for a booster. So they decided at first on 10. Now, the reason I say this is a little up in the air is because, Thomas, I don't know if you caught a lot of the pictures that our crew took of the Falcon 9 while it was out at the pad this morning, but there are quite a lot of little lines along the weld points and the weld
Mm-hmm.
seams, which seems to me to indicate that they did a bit more investigation and a bit more non-destructive evaluation is what it's called of the booster from its previous flight before it got to here. So with that in mind, not sure what is left, not sure how SpaceX might be changing their plan as they got more and more boosters back, as the fleet leaders and those high flight rate boosters started coming back. So there is some things that are still up in the air that are yet to be seen with exactly how they're going to do this, but the bottom line is like this is the big one. Like this is the one they wanted to get to. It's not just a nice round number. It's for their inspection purposes a big flight. So whether or not they sort of did them ahead of time because they knew they were going to have a lull when they had to stand down really for the Crew 2 flight with NASA here last month. So remains to be seen, but we do know that additional inspections kick in at the 10 flight mark. But, you know, again, that was several years ago. Things might have changed as they've gained more operational insight into these boosters, and they may have already done some of the evaluations on it just because of the extra time they had prior to the launch of this mission.
Gotcha, and that ties into some of the other questions we're getting here. We got one asking, how many flights can a Falcon booster fly? So today being the 10th flight, first time a booster will fly a 10th flight, and we know that was a goal that SpaceX had for how many flights they wanted to get out of a booster, but that doesn't make it a limit, right? They could potentially
Right.
fly beyond this as well.
Oh, 100%. And to be clear, 10 is not the limit for the Falcon 9. 10 is sort of you get to that and we want to do a bit more robust inspections before we put it back into the fleet to let it keep flying, right? To go to 11 and 12 and onward and upward. Each Falcon 9 booster was built with the notional lifetime of 100 flights. Although Elon Musk has said maybe they could get more out of them if they needed. And then Gwen Shotwell came back and said, well, yeah, they're built for that, but they don't actually think that there's the customer demand with how quickly Starship is being developed, that they don't actually think any Falcon 9 will get to 100 flights. Just because of the flight rate, the customer base, and the fact that Starship is coming along. And a goal of Starship is, in a lot of ways, to make the Falcon 9 obsolete, even though SpaceX has said they will continue to fly the Falcon 9 as long as there is a customer base after Starship is up and running.
Right, and for context, I mean, Falcon 9 has flown a little over 100 missions since it debuted, so 100
Yes.
missions for a single booster, that would even at the flight rate they're flying right now, that would take a while just to reach that number. And like you said, Starship is going to be coming along and taking on the role of most SpaceX missions by that point.
Yeah, and especially since the overview that you just gave of all the boosters that are in the fleet, there are more boosters that will be joining the fleet this year as well. As long as they can really mitigate those losses, there shouldn't be the need for that many more new Falcon 9s. But with your flight rate, you're also kind of up against just mathematics there on how many times each one of them is going to fly.
I'm going to keep the questions coming as we get up to T-minus 39 minutes and counting. At T-minus 38 minutes, the pre-launch poll will be conducted. The SpaceX launch director will poll all of the team members for their readiness to go for launch. Of course, that's all a computerized and automated poll. It is not a verbal poll, so we won't hear that, but we will hear the outcome prior to T-minus 35 minutes when fueling will begin. So while we get to the beginning of today's countdown, I'm going to keep some questions coming. Relating to reuse, the big milestone being reached today, a question, how much have SpaceX potentially saved by reusing this stage 1 10 times? Do we have a good idea or any idea as to the cost savings for how much cost savings they've made with this booster?
I wish we had a firm number to give. Unfortunately, the only number that we know of that was made public was that SpaceX sold a flight-proven Falcon 9 to NASA for an upcoming science mission for $53 million. And we can infer a few things from that. One, that $53 million is not the actual cost of the booster itself being reused. The actual cost of that booster is lower because NASA science missions come with what are known as extras or add-on options to contracts and launches, right? So NASA is going to require certain things that are above and beyond what a standard payload flow would be, and that increases the cost to NASA even to use a vehicle that's as cheap as the Falcon 9. So we know that that 53 million is all encompassing for everything that SpaceX has to do that's above and beyond what they would normally do if it was like a, say, a standard telecommunications satellite going to geostationary transfer orbit. So that's the only figure that we have that sort of gives an idea that the Falcon 9 price point is probably somewhere in the low 40s to upper 30s for science missions for NASA. We know NASA has been getting more and more comfortable with booster reuses, but unfortunately, we don't know what booster is allocated to that mission. If NASA has a limit of like, oh, it can only have flown 2 times or 3 times at most before we get it. Those are all sort of questions that would go into answering more accurately how much are they saving. And the reason I wanted to start with that, even though it doesn't have anything to do with this particular booster, is we don't actually know what any of the contracts this booster has flown for paying customers have been sold for. All we know is that it debuted on the Demo 2 flight, which was the uncrewed test flight of the Crew Dragon back in March of 2019. It was then taken across the country to launch the RadarSat Constellation mission for the Canadian Space Agency. Then it came back here and it launched Starlink, and then on its 7th flight, launched the Sirius XM Satellite 7 flight, or satellite up into orbit. And that was a big moment. You know, first time a customer was happy and good to use a booster that was flying for the 7th time, but nobody mentioned the price. So because no one's mentioning the price, we don't really have a firm number to hand just for this booster. And the internal Starlink missions also kind of complicate what cost savings are because SpaceX doesn't charge themselves for a booster. So I wouldn't necessarily include the Starlink missions as a fair assessment of how much can be saved from a booster from a paying customer standpoint. And I know that was long and kind of winded, but I hope that provides like the context of why it's a really great question. I wish I had a better number to hand you, but 53 million all in for a NASA science mission on a reused booster is the lowest number we have publicly.
Gotcha. We are coming up at T-minus 35 minutes and counting. We're going to be listening into the SpaceX countdown nets for confirmation that fueling has started at T-minus 35 minutes RP. And we do confirm launch auto sequence has started.
Launch auto sequence has started.
There it goes. So the SpaceX Falcon 9 is now being fueled with RP-1 kerosene and liquid oxygen in the first stage, and RP-1 kerosene is also flowing into stage 2. That is the first of the first 3 fueling events that are now underway to get Falcon 9 fueled and ready for launch. And that liftoff is again slated for 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time. Might have misspoken earlier by a couple minutes. 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:42 UTC for today's liftoff. And again, that is about 34 minutes now from liftoff.
I think we can forgive that. It's early, Thomas.
Thank you. Gonna keep the questions coming here. We have one asking, do we know the trajectory of tonight's launch? Julia, for those down potentially in Florida or elsewhere along the coast, where should we be looking to catch a glimpse of the launch if we're out and about?
If we're out and about, look toward, well, northeast, because that's where it's going. It's heading up the coast about 633 kilometers, and that is off the coast of North Carolina. So anywhere along that route from here to North Carolina, just look east.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think Thomas, you might even get to see it up where you are right now. At least when it's on the second stage, far dimmer. But our friends in the northeast corridor of the U.S. also have a chance to see it. Much dimmer, Julio. Definitely referring to the first stage there, but you might be able to see the second stage as a moving little faint dot across the stars in the sky if it's clear.
I hope some of my friends up here might be able to do that. I know from my current perspective, I can unfortunately report that clouds I think are going to get in my way today. But that's okay. I've seen a few launches in my time. I think we're okay. And well, of course, I'll have the best seat in the house with the stream from you, Chris. So I think we're okay. I'll keep the questions coming here. Here's a good one. We were talking about the booster inventory earlier. Zach wants to know, can the boosters on a Falcon Heavy fly missions on their own? So talking about, could basically a Falcon Heavy booster act as a Falcon 9 booster? And Elon and SpaceX have said in the past that that is possible. It has not happened to date. The two Falcon Heavy boosters that supported both the Arabsat mission and the STP-2 mission, the second and third Falcon Heavy missions, those boosters have not been activated to act as the Falcon 9 fleet. They've been, well, just inactive parts of the Falcon booster fleet. Of course, we've seen the inverse. The two boosters that flew on the Falcon Heavy demo flight were converted Falcon 9s, but not the other way around. So we haven't seen it happen, but SpaceX and Elon have said that it can happen. So if that is still in the cards and still something that SpaceX might have planned, we will have to see if that ever comes to fruition. But so far, it hasn't happened. Here is a
Yeah.
question. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say a little shocking that it didn't happen, especially since they lost a couple of boosters last year on landing failures. Like there have been a couple that we have lost, and the fact that they didn't reconfigure those Falcon Heavy side cores to be Falcon 9s in their own right was a little perplexing. But I guess they really just didn't need them in the manifest. They could afford to lose those two and still be fine and not need to replace them immediately.
Got a question here asking how many new boosters do they produce per year? So, of course, SpaceX relying on reused hardware a lot to meet their launch gains, but they are also expanding the fleet. Do we know what their production rate looks like, Chris?
Well, I think this year there are at least what three that will join that have the potential to be Falcon 9s in their own right. Some are Falcon 9 firsts. There are the two side cores for Falcon Heavy. There's the new center cores for the Falcon Heavy, which don't really get turned around for Falcon 9 flights because of how different they are. I think we've seen about two to three a year new ones that enter. Maybe that bumps up when there's a Falcon Heavy that's flying all brand new, but that's about what we've seen between last year and what this year has planned in terms of new additions to the fleet. But I think the best answer to the question is it's largely dependent on what the customer wants, because Gwen did say at one point that, you know, if a customer comes and says we want you to build us a new booster, they'll do it, even though they may have 13 or 14 of them lying around waiting, you know, that are available for use. They'll build a new one if a customer wants it, and if they need to replenish the fleet. But really, it's on a customer a desire basis at this point.
Gotcha. Tom wants to know, will these satellites be visible at night during their future orbits?
Great question. So to the casual observer on the ground at night, like true night, no, they are not visible at night. They are visible primarily in the twilight time periods in sunrise and sunset. However, even from an astronomer standpoint, an interesting thing we learned from Jonathan McDowell last Saturday, and I hope, Jonathan, that you are sleeping and not watching this because of all of your great work with the Shang-Shang 5B stage over the last few days. But Jonathan pointed out that while the Starlinks are somewhat of an annoyance and they're definitely a concern for the astronomy community, even telescopes at the far northern and southern latitudes where during the summer solstice you would have the greatest chance of interference of light pollution from Starlinks, they really do disappear at night from a reflectivity and visible standpoint, even in that, based on a lot of the changes SpaceX has made from them. So from both a standard point of view, from just us on the ground, no, they're not visible at night, and even to astronomers, they're getting a lot better based on where they are.
Gotcha. For those of you just joining us, we're at T-minus 28 minutes and counting. Fueling for Falcon 9 is continuing. We're starting to see some of those vapors from the side of Falcon 9. Of course, it's hiding behind the transporter or erector from our camera view, but you can still see some of the vapors from the air condensing around the super cold fueled rocket. And as fueling is proceeding, no technical or weather items being worked right now. Everything proceeding on time for a liftoff at 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, we're going to keep some questions coming here. A question asking, or Diecast Kid said, "You guys are awesome. Thank you for doing this." A question: Will Starlink ever launch out of Vandenberg?
Why, yes. In fact, stay tuned 2 months from now. According to Gwen Shotwell, July is when they intend to start launching Starlinks from Vandenberg into polar orbits, into some of the polar orbital shells. So that will be definitely something to look forward to, especially for everyone in California who's been a little launch deprived of late. Never fear, Starlinks are coming to Vandenberg as early as July. Yes.
Michael,
And you know an
thoughts?
indicator of that?
Yes, Julia?
Pauline found the recovery crew is starting to
Yes.
reassemble.
Yes, there are
Yes.
signs that life is returning to SpaceX West Coast recovery operations as well. Yes.
I will not be complaining, I can say that much.
I was going to
Bet
say,
not.
right?
And it will be interesting. It'll be the first time we've had a drone ship recovery in Vandenberg for a while once those Starlink missions get underway. A lot of the recent missions have been limited to those return to launch site trajectories, landing at landing zone 4. So, like
Yeah.
you said, the recovery team's getting back together for
Yeah,
some
which
SpaceX West Coast stops is very exciting.
it does raise an interesting point, though. What drone ship will they use? Or if they don't have a drone ship, will they have to reduce the number of Starlinks on board the Falcon 9 to permit it to return to launch site land at Vandenberg? Some interesting things. If you don't have a drone ship, you can't catch it downrange in the Pacific, and they don't have a drone ship in the Pacific right now that they have talked about. So either a shortfall of gravitas is about to make one heck of a first appearance, or we're headed for some interested payload, an interesting payload shuffle here.
Demystifying a shortfall of gravitas. Yes.
Right? Yeah, like of wherever it is. But overall, it will be nice to see. And the start of Starlink launches out of Vandenberg actually tells us something else, which is very important. So we know that they are reaching very closely here the point where they will have all 1,564 Starlink satellites that are part of the initial orbital constellation at 550 kilometers, 53-degree inclination to Earth. They have said that was the shell they would build out first. That, with the exception of like a ride share when they could take it with Starlinks to other destinations, they weren't going to do dedicated flights there. So the fact that Gwen is talking about dedicated flights to polar shells means that SpaceX really, really does believe that by maybe the end of May, and if they could get a Starlink in June in their very busy schedule for other people, maybe it would be June, but that really tells us that by May and June, all of those 1,500 plus satellites for the initial orbital shell will be in orbit. Because then SpaceX will shift gears and they'll go toward a more dual approach where they'll continue to launch out of here into some of the other equatorial shells that they need to get into, as well as overlapping those with flights out of Vandenberg. So it's not like they're going to just switch and do the polar shells and then come back here. They're going to start overlapping which shells they send the next rounds of Starlinks into. And that's a very important part of building out the constellation, both for the increase in reliability, the increase in throughput and customer demand, and also creating more of a backup in orbit so that if one satellite goes down, you're not SOL as you're waiting for the next one to come into range.
Gotcha. Keeping the questions coming here. James asked, "Does a hot dog qualify as a sandwich?" Yes. Modi Space Industries with the Thomas 10 Club. Thank you so much for the support. A question here. Fireball asking, will Starlink ever launch from Vandy? Lucky you, someone else beat you to the question. The answer is still yes. Coming up maybe later this year. Mark says, love the coverage even in the middle of the night. Keep up the great work. Appreciate it. And Sam, here's an interesting question. Do you think that SpaceX will ever be allowed to fly nuclear payloads? Also, thank you for all the content. Thank you for the kind words there, Sam. So referring to the certification required to launch nuclear-powered payloads, such as the Mars rovers that ULA has been launching on Atlas V, things like that. Chris, what's the path for SpaceX to get those kind of payloads manifested?
I believe the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy are already certified for those kind of scientific payloads that would carry nuclear, that would carry RTGs, radioisotopic thermoelectric generators
That's the one.
is the mouthful that acronym means, which is why we just say RTG. Yeah, no, the Falcon fleet is already certified to carry those. There just aren't missions coming up that use them, that require rockets yet. So stay tuned. It's not out of the possibility. I believe an RTG is exactly what's going to power the Dragonfly mission to the big flying drone the size of a car to Titan. But it's way too early in the design process for that mission to be thinking of to be selecting the rocket yet. But yeah, the Falcon fleet can do it.
Gotcha. And Hagen Worgen. Now wait a second, Hagen, aren't you one of our writers? Thanks for the support there, Hagen. We appreciate it. Says go internet rocket go, of course. Let's see. Musical Wolves asks, was SpaceX going to also have a Michigan launch facility for polar orbit launches? Was that a SpaceX thing or was that something else? I do know there was something about a Michigan launch facility.
There was something about a Michigan launch facility because I remember sending it to Brady going, really?
Yeah.
But I don't believe it was SpaceX. I believe it was a different company. At least this is how my memory serves.
I think you're right.
It was a different company, and the instant question everyone had was, where do you go from Michigan? I mean, because you have to overfly land if you're launching from Michigan. I mean, it's a question we kind of laugh at, but it was a real one. Like if you're not just doing suborbital sounding flights, where do you launch orbitally from in Michigan? And I don't know if that's a question I ever saw a resolution to. But I can also say that after hearing there was a company willing to go to Michigan, I didn't hear a lot about it afterward.
Right.
So I don't know, because Michigan is hard from a liftoff standpoint because yes, you have the Great Lakes right there, but you do literally have to overfly other land masses. And there is our big
Stage 2
T-minus
RP1
20
load
minute
is complete.
event.
And that
And we also-
coincides with the stage 2 RP1 load complete call out. And now that RP1 load is complete, that T-minus 20-minute event is giving us the visual indicator that they are getting ready to begin stage 2 liquid oxygen loading, which will start at T-minus 16 minutes. So the fueling countdown proceeding nominally right now.
Indeed, that big gush of gaseous oxygen out of the side of the Falcon 9 is exactly what we want to see at T-minus 20 minutes and counting.
A question here from Charlie asking, will the Starlink launches from Vandenberg fly over land or is it mostly ocean?
Good. Yes, ocean. So this is in large part why the Vandenberg launch complex exists, because we can't overfly land, we're very limited from Florida in terms of how much mass the Falcon 9s or the Falcon Heavies can take into a polar orbit, because you can't directly launch on the trajectory you want to be on to get into a polar orbit from Florida. You have to fly as far due south as you possibly can, but that's still like east south or south southeast out of Kennedy and the Cape, because you have to avoid Florida. And then once you're far enough out, you can then angle your rocket, reposition it. It's a huge performance hit to what you can take to orbit, but that's how you have to do it to get to Florida. But it's a big hit in terms of the payload you can take. So that's why we have Vandenberg, because all of the polar trajectories that we need from the United States can be reached from Vandenberg while only launching out over the open ocean. So that is why we have Vandenberg, and we'll always have Vandenberg for now.
Gotcha. Let's see here. Julia, I've got some fleet questions for you. One asking, has there been any recent news on that third drone ship we mentioned, a shortfall of gravitas earlier?
Well, a little bit of CSI work has been done, and I would just say watch Gavin, because there's been some digging done, and maybe. But has there been anything said? No, I think we heard there would be news this month. What news that is, I am honestly not certain. I know it has been quite elusive, though. But we're working on some of the usual suspects, places we've seen drone ships before, and maybe, just maybe, it'll come out of the woodwork. Because Vandenberg sure needs something to recover these boosters with, don't they? Yeah.
They do.
Yeah,
Of-
and I mean, you'd have to just reduce the number of Starlinks by so much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, that you would really start to wonder if it was worth it from a cost standpoint if you don't have the drone ship to grab them afterward from Vandy. Yeah.
I mean, right now we're looking at a drone ship that's just coming back as one's being caught, and the cadence is getting kind of tight down here to the point I almost feel like we need the third one here.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, all it takes is one weather delay, and then what are you going to do? Oh, and on that note, we have a new tug coming back with, of course, I Still Love You Tomorrow, which is Mr. Jonah. And Mr. Jonah brought the SLS course stage. So I'm curious to see with Falcon, or I'm sorry, with Hawk. Wow, all these birds. With Hawk having been laid up, and they're still in Jacksonville, by the way, so they're not coming back anytime really soon. I wonder if maybe Mr. Jonah, who is a cousin to Finn Falget, by the way, perhaps we'll see them stick around a little bit longer. So we'll see how this mission goes for them, and if they get another run out, because somebody's got to take Pegasus back too. So
That's true. Pegasus doesn't just stay here now that it's delivered the core stage.
But when does
but then again,
Pegasus
what
have
else
a
does it
drone?
have to deliver?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
maybe it can grace us. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Speaking of
we'll see how it plays out.
Speaking of the recovery fleet on station for today's launch, we know we have just read the instructions positioned downrange for the Stage 1 recovery. I believe there was some interesting work as far as getting ships in position for fairing recovery today. Julia, what's SpaceX fairing recovery teams doing today?
Oh my goodness. You know what? I think that's like a trick question because I forgot to check on them. It would still be Sheila out there. But I heard there was only one fairing half that was recovered. So that's kind of interesting. Wait, now y'all are tricking me. I didn't do my homework. Now I have to open
I
up
can
marine
pull up
traffic.
some Twitter feeds and check for you if you'd like.
You know, Gavin and I were doing CSI work. It's a little hard to do CSI work and keep track of the fleet.
Let me see what
Let's
other
see.
question. I'll see
We'll
if
see
I.
where everyone's
but
sitting.
but the general.
I
But the
heard
general.
Searcher was gone.
I think Gavin said something about Go America heading up
Yeah.
north to get the fairing recovered on the previous mission.
See, Gavin says Go Searcher is outbound for Florida. That was yesterday, or not yesterday, earlier today. Or no, it was yesterday because it's 2 a.m. I gotta remember what time it is. And then, so yeah, Go Searcher went out. Looks like it might recover a half. Oh, it's going to Morehead City to get a fairing half that Sheila offered. So Sheila Bordelon is likely back in position to recover the halves from this launch.
Yep, I just checked marine traffic. She was heading back out to the landing zone. So basically,
Gotcha.
somebody had to go pick up her fairing half. Funny story there. I don't know what happened to the other fairing half, but according to their designation, and sorry about the train right behind me, but that's life. According to her designation after launch, she was babysitting a fairing half. Where that fairing half was, I don't know. But they were out at sea for quite a while after launch. A lot longer than normal, to be exact. If a fairing half fell and they couldn't retrieve it because of the weather, it's possible they were waiting for it to sink. Kind of hard to say. But in the end, it looks like this one came back. Somebody else has to babysit them. And now they've got to bring it back to port. So hopefully we come back with 2 reused fairings again this mission.
Gotcha. A question here, will the Falcon 9 ever launch from Wallops? Well, Falcon 9 will never launch from Wallops. SpaceX has their East Coast launch site at Cape Canaveral, actually 2 pads at Cape Canaveral, so no need for a launch site from Wallops Flight Facility up in Virginia, although there will be a somewhat Falcon 9 inspired rocket in the form of Rocket Lab's Neutron rocket, which will launch from Wallops, so that's about as close as you'll get, but no SpaceX operations in Wallops in the works. A question, will I get any good views of any form of the launch from Arkansas? Unfortunately, I do not believe Arkansas was far enough east to catch a glimpse of this launch. Don't think so, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've never actually seen Arkansas in the in the map of visibility for a rocket going out of Florida.
A question here from Mark asking, could Starship retrieve the Hubble Space Telescope?
Could Starship do it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, from a physical standpoint, from a technological standpoint, yes. Starship is big enough to go get Hubble and bring it back. If that were desired, you would just simply need to develop the payload attachment mechanisms and some way to grab it, because starships don't have robotic arms like the space shuttles did, and that's really the only way we have to grab Hubble right now. So you'd have to devise a way, but I mean, from a technical standpoint, something could definitely be developed to allow it to secure Hubble in its cargo hold, so it can do it.
Gotcha. I got a question in chat here asking where this camera is located. This camera is crewed by Mr. Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor for NASASpaceflight, who I believe, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, is out on the ITL causeway at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And how many miles away from the pad are you today, Chris?
Yeah, so we are approximately 3 miles or 5 kilometers away from pad 40. We're actually basically due south of the launch pad, and you can see the big gray metal structure there in the center, sort of obscuring the white part of the rocket, except for the very top of the payload fairing there. That's the transporter erector, so we are directly behind that. So it'll throw back toward us at liftoff as the Falcon 9 rises and then heads out northeast from us.
Gotcha. We've got a question here. All right, I'm going to give Chris first dibs on this question. I might have something to add to it depending on how he answers it. But he says, Tory Bruno has once said that reusability would only be worth it if the whole fleet reaches 10 flights. Do you think that he was right, or has SpaceX reusability already paid off?
I hesitate to answer that question because Tory's ULA. So when I hear Tory say 10 flights is what's needed to make it economical, are we absolutely certain he was quipping about the Falcon 9? Because I don't think he was. I think what he was saying is the system that ULA was looking at, and what their insights, what their people were telling them, is that for their system and how it was being designed, you needed 10 to really get into the economics of how much you've saved versus how much you put into the booster. Because I don't think the economic benefits to reuse require a Falcon 9 to reach 10 flights. If it were, we wouldn't see SpaceX using them over and over and over and over and over again for their Starlink constellation. So I think the answer to that is highly dependent on what kind of a system you are designing and what the initial cost point is for that system, and whether or not you're aiming to recover that cost up front when you sell the booster the first time, or whether you're looking to sort of amortize the cost of that booster out across multiple flights like they do in the airline industry. But that's not still quite how we do it here in the rocket industry. I'm curious, Thomas, what would you add to that?
I think you covered for the most of it. I definitely agree that The 10 flight as a goal for SpaceX, again, that was the goal they were trying to at least reach with these Falcon boosters, but it has been very clear based on the price points coming down in the contract numbers that we do get. Again, we don't know every launch contract value, but for the ones for like NASA and all the ones that are publicly announced, we've seen those numbers coming down, and we've only first reached this 10th flight today. It is very clear that reusability has paid off for SpaceX well before reaching the 10 flight milestone. So that's the point
And
I would just drive home.
yeah, and I think having heard you say that too, the only thing I would add to our previous statements is while we don't have specific price points, customers have been very vocal about, oh yeah, no, the price has come down.
Yeah.
On them. So it's not just SpaceX saying the price has come down. Customers are saying it has as well. We just unfortunately don't have, a firm number for all of them to give.
Sure. We're coming up at T-minus 7 minutes and counting. At this point in the countdown, some liquid oxygen is going to be flowed through the plumbing of the 9 Merlin 1D engines on that first stage to begin the engine chill process. That will chill down the plumbing components so that when the full flow of propellant goes through at engine ignition, the engine does not damage itself. And again, the countdown is proceeding nominally for a liftoff just under 7 minutes from now. Gonna keep the questions going for a little bit as we get a little closer to launch. I got a couple of super chats. Taylor is saying the dorm I live in is named Vandenberg at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Would love to see Falcon 9 launch right outside my room. Taylor, thanks for the support there. Joshua with a new membership. Thank you so much. Dustin with a super chat. Thank you. Ryan Bale with the super chat. On behalf of Michigan, I accept the rockets flying over land. Appreciate the support there,
Oh,
Ryan.
hey, Ryan.
And here's a question from Dustin. Could SpaceX use an oil platform for landing? We know they acquired those two former oil rigs. Could they be used for Falcon 9 ops, or are they reserved for Starship
Stage 1
operations?
RP1 load is complete.
Okay, and there we hear as fueling begins to wrap up in a few different phases here across the Falcon 9. The answer to your question is, I mean, from a technical standpoint, could a Falcon 9 land on one of the converted oil rigs, Phobos or Deimos? I mean, certainly could, but no, those are large. Those are reserved for Starship at this point.
Gotcha, yeah.
And I would not want to see you try to haul an oil rig through the Panama Canal to
That is true. That would be
get it
difficult.
to Vandenberg. Yeah, so it's a good question, but no, the oil rigs just from the sheer size are devoted to Starship, and we will see a shortfall of Gravitas at some point here join the drone ship fleet to augment Just Read the Instructions, and of course I Still Love You out, most likely on the West Coast, because that's where they need a drone ship the most right now.
Right.
Hey, Chris Gebhardt,
Hey, Julia Bergeron.
do you have any wild animals by you? Because I have a wild animal by me.
I do not, but I hope yours is not the snappy, pointy kind.
I wasn't sure at first, but it turns out it's a dolphin.
Oh, good.
Ah,
Okay.
there we go.
Those are lucky, from what I've been told by captains. So,
Those
and by
are
the way,
lucky,
y'all,
yes.
Matt Haskell says hi. He's the one who confirmed it was a dolphin indeed.
There you go.
Ah, hey, Matt. Yeah, there was a dolphin. There was a dolphin out with the SpaceX recovery vessel as we waited for the Dragon Resilience to come home with Crew 1 the other day. Yeah.
Also,
Aw,
I don't know,
just
Chris.
wanted to
There's
make sure
always
you were good.
KST security around. Even if you can't
There's
see them, they can see you.
I know, and it's night, so I'm as far from the water as possible.
Dougal with the super chat. Go Space 10. Get that X to launch. There we go. Appreciate the support there. A question: for those of us in DC, will we be able to see this Falcon 9? Potentially, if the weather is
Yes.
cooperating by you. You are along the eastern coast, and you might be able to catch a glimpse of that Stage 2 burn. You're a little too far north for the first stage, but you might be able to catch a glimpse of Falcon 9's second stage on its way to orbit. So, if you've got clear skies, definitely take a look out towards the east over the ocean.
Yeah, although I think if you are like coastal Maryland in that regard, you and coastal Virginia, you are close enough if it's clear enough to see the entry burn. because we can see it here from Florida on a clear night
Mhm.
from the Cape, and they're about 600 kilometers north of us when they do that. So 600 kilometers further north of there, along the Virginia and Maryland, maybe even Delaware, I think that might be pushing it. But definitely along those coasts, if it's clear, you might have a shot at seeing the entry burn as well.
Gotcha. And I'm going to go with one more question before we turn our attention towards liftoff. We're just under 3 minutes away. Bradley wants to ask, what
Stage 1
parts of
lock
the
load
first
complete.
stage of Falcon 9, Stage 1 lock load complete, what parts of the first stage of Falcon 9 are more likely to fail as they rack up more launches? Are there any pieces of hardware in specific
Ooh.
that we know they might be keeping an extra close eye on?
I think the heat shield around the base of the vehicle would be the primary area of concern, because that's the one that's going to get more and more charring. That's the area that's exposed to the most heating on the vehicle. You know, you're not really worried about the Merlin engine bells in that regard, because they have to be able to withstand higher temperatures when the Merlins are firing. So they're not the problem coming in. I would say the area that gets the most attention is likely the heat shield at the base, because any little breach in a heat shield, and we know this lesson very difficultly, but any little breach in a heat shield can be very, very, very bad when you're coming in to the atmosphere.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to activate Nate's camera, and then I'll get our live stream camera ready here.
Stage 2 lock load complete.
Sounds good, Chris. We're at T-minus 90 seconds right now, so just over a minute away. Again, if you're just joining us, this is the Starlink version 1 L27 mission. It's actually launching out of order. L26 hasn't happened yet. L26 will happen later. We don't know the reason behind that, but this is the L27 designation. 60 Starlink satellites bound for low Earth orbit on a SpaceX Falcon 9. Booster 1051 is making the 10th flight for this booster, which is a new record for SpaceX. You're looking at pad 40 and the Falcon 9 getting ready for liftoff, T-minus 1 minute and counting.
And Chris, you're good to mute on Discord. We're going to turn on your microphone.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, T-minus 45 seconds and counting. Falcon 9's flight computers have taken over control of the countdown at this point, and the Stage 1 and Stage 2 tanks are all pressurizing to flight levels. Engine start will be commanded at T-minus 3 seconds, and at an on-time liftoff here in just under 30 seconds, we'll send Falcon 9 on its way to the northeast from Cape Canaveral on a ride to orbit with 60 new Starlink satellites. It's now under 20 seconds and counting. Ten seconds and counting. The sound suppression water system has been activated. 2, 1. We have stage 1 ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink L27 mission and the 10th flight of booster 1051 for SpaceX's new reuse record. And 25 seconds after liftoff, that gorgeous sound as Falcon 9 rips off the pad. Falcon 9 now experiencing maximum aerodynamic pressure, throttling down to control the stresses on the vehicle. Flight continuing nominally right now. Vehicle heading northeast from the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on its way to orbit. You can start to see some really good flame detail as the stage 1 engine plume expands as it gets higher in the atmosphere. And as that atmospheric pressure goes down, the exhaust gases from the engines will expand and spread out. An absolutely gorgeous track from Chris down at the press site there. Now 2 minutes into flight, everything looking good.
Falcon 9 is following a nominal trajectory.
SpaceX confirms trajectory is nominal. Chris, feel free to rejoin comms whenever you're ready. Right now, stage 1 is going to continue firing for just a bit longer. We're coming up on main engine cutoff, and there is main engine cutoff. Stage separation. Standing by for ignition of the upper stage. And there it is, Merlin vacuum ignition
Main
on
engine
the
cut
upper
off.
stage.
Stage separation confirmed.
Carl, it's a little bit behind. We've got a little less latency on our actual camera. We can see the stage 2 has begun its first burn.
Invac ignition.
And
And
I
there is
am back with you on comms, Thomas.
Welcome back, Chris. Great track, Chris. Right now, that stage 2 is on its first of 2 burns. Of course, after this initial burn, it'll enter a coast phase and then a very brief second burn before spacecraft deployment. Everything proceeding nominally right now.
So you know what's lovely? Watch this. This is the SpaceX stream right now, and they're still at stage separation. And if you want to know why that is, it's because they recently decided to upgrade to 4K, and YouTube does not support low latency broadcasts in 4K. So SpaceX, you're way behind us, but there is the stage separation once again from the onboard cameras of Falcon 9. And you can see on the left-hand side of your screen the awesome shot of the Florida Peninsula with those lights from probably Orlando from that camera.
Yep, and you can see those grid fins deploying, illuminated by the stage 2 plume. Also some video of fairing separation, which has of course occurred. Stage 1 will be reorienting itself, ready for its 10th landing attempt. It's done its job for the primary mission so far, so a successful 10th flight so far for booster 1051. It'll be heading down towards just read the instructions downrange in the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, stage 2 also proceeding nominally at this time.
So Chris is gonna see the entry burn way before the SpaceX webcast.
Yes.
Gets
Yeah.
close to it.
Give me a heads up when we're getting close to that time period. I'm just tracking the second stage as best I can.
Yeah.
But sounds like everything's going nominally with it.
Yep, everything nominal at this time. Stage 1 coasting towards its own apogee on its way back down to Earth, and then stage 2 continuing to accelerate towards orbital velocity. Both stages are actually in space. Of course, only one of them will be reaching orbit today.
The SpaceX webcast is on a 45-second latency right now.
I believe I have lost the second stage. Do you guys see it in my field of view or no?
I'm
Mike,
checking
do
for
you
you.
have that?
I don't see it, no.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna widen back out and get ready for the entry burn.
Copy that. There's a gorgeous track of the initial ascent there as stage 2 starts to head over the hill, as we say. Still continuing nominally. And we're going to keep an eye out for that stage 1 entry burn. We're definitely keeping an eye on that booster. We want to see that fly an 11th mission and more after that. But it's got to make that 10th landing first. Just read the instructions, waiting to catch it downrange. Again, the flight proceeding nominally at this time.
Yeah, it was a gorgeous launch. I mean, crystal clear skies. I can still barely see the second stage with the naked eye right now, so really standing by for that entry burn here. But it was gorgeous. I mean, everything from a timing perspective looks like it had a good performance from the first stage in terms of when some of the callouts were happening here.
Okay, entry burn should be starting any second here, Chris.
Okay.
So just yell if you see it and I'll cut to you.
I gotcha. Got it. Oh, I see it. Hang on, let me try to find it now. There it is.
There it
That is
is.
and there it goes. That is the entry burn happening about 600 kilometers away, and it's done.
There is stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
So wait to see that
Happens
all
to-
happen now on the SpaceX webcast.
And now we're going to watch it again.
Yeah.
But a nice shot there, Chris. Stage 1 on its way back down.
Yes, indeed.
That entry burn slows it down and also provides some weird aerodynamic properties that actually act as a heat shield. It's very interesting stuff to help protect the first stage on its way back down. And there is the delayed video from SpaceX of the onboard camera. Meanwhile, stage 2 continuing to head towards orbit.
Very good.
And stage 1 entry shutdown occurring just at about 6,000 kilometers per hour. And now aerodynamic track is going to do the rest of the work. You can see it interacting with the grid fins there. Still going to get pretty toasty. But you can really see yeah, you can really see the speed of stage 1 cutting down. Again, the engines are not firing anymore. That's just aerodynamic drag doing the work. And interestingly, they have kept this video feed after the entry burn. Normally they lose it. That is very interesting. That's an awesome view of stage 1 re-entering.
Yeah, I know they have telemetry and tracking of it from the Cape for a while, and then it switches to the drone ship as it's coming in. So hopefully we can see that. You can see its altitude just under 7 kilometers now, speed falling rapidly, standing by for that ignition burn. But we're also keeping our eye on the Stage 2 Merlin back engine, because that is the one doing the job of the mission now and hauling the Starlink stack into its initial parking orbit, and it's almost there. So these things happen very quickly. Let's see what we get.
Yep, stage 1 landing should come just before stage 2 reaches orbit. So let's take a look. There is the stage 1 landing from the onboard camera.
Look at that.
Okay, that's cool.
That
and
is
there is the
wicked
deck
cool.
What?
the instructions.
Oh, look at it just appear in the ocean.
Oh my God, they figured out that video.
Oh, they figured out the video. Look at that. Look at that. On the drone ship, on Of Course I Still Love You, safely in the Atlantic Ocean. That, my friends, is booster 1051, successfully completing its 10th flight, standing tall on the drone ship, and waiting to be brought back now to Port Canaveral for inspection and to be re-entered into the fleet for reuse. And there is SECO, or stage engine cutoff, which means that the Falcon 9 second stage has entered its preliminary parking orbit around Earth and is now in about a 37-minute coast before it will reignite that engine for a second, literally a second, and that will finalize the orbit into a roughly 270-kilometer circular orbit. And then it will be deployment about an hour and 1 minute after liftoff. But guys, that was a phenomenal liftoff, and even though Doss isn't here with us, I have Doss's favorite shot ready. But just look at that. That is from the booster.
That is
On
an
the
awesome view on
the
Just
drone
Read the
ship.
Instructions.
That's my
Booster.
favorite view.
Isn't it? There are actually
Ugh.
2 boosters on 2 drone ships right now, and they're both going to be headed back to Port Canaveral. That is awesome.
So
Life is good.
incredible. Life is good indeed. And again, we will wait for SpaceX and the official word that everything was good, but simply based on the timing of the callouts today, the fact that we have a booster on the drone ship, we have 60 Starlink satellites in orbit on their way to their final destination. That is what I call a good 10th reflight of a Falcon 9. I don't know about you, Thomas, but that makes me happy.
Absolutely. Everything looked picture perfect so far. Again, the stage 2's work is not done. There is a brief second burn that will last a second. Trying not to be confusing there. Before the Starlink satellites are actually deployed. But stage 1 definitely did its job on its 10th mission. And stage 2 so far looking good as well. And of course, we've got our favorite post-launch view, an empty launch pad. Space Launch Complex 40 will also be getting ready for its next mission. No one talks about the reusable launch pads, Chris.
We should, because they've been reusable right off the bat, right?
They really have. So early
Yes,
phases of flight looking perfect, and of course, Chris, just let us know when you have to pack up your camera rig.
will do. All good right now. No one has even made a motion to start lining up yet, except for one
Okay.
person. So, all good for right now. Yeah. I will definitely let you know. But yeah, I mean, this was exciting, and I mean, let's put this into context too, right? Because if you have the feeling that we were just here for one, you're correct.
Hmm.
On May 4th, so just over 4 days ago, another Falcon 9 launched from Launch Complex 39A off of the Kennedy Space Center with a round of Starlink satellites. This one follows. So, in less than 4 days, SpaceX has put 120 satellites into orbit. And interspersed in there was the first successful high altitude test flight of Starship, which successfully made a landing in Texas. It's been a busy 4 days for SpaceX, wouldn't you say?
It's been a busy time for SpaceX. Pick your time interval. It seems to have been busy for SpaceX. Absolutely.
That's very true. Yeah. You mentioned the reusable pads, Thomas, because 39A and 40 have a lot of important missions coming up back to back with one another. We know there is another Starlink mission that is coming up here very shortly. Let me go ahead and pull up a little app called.
May 15th.
I think we might have lost Chris's comms there for a second, but I'm going to assume he was going to say it was the next Starlink mission over at Pad 39A, like Michael mentioned, will be Saturday, May 15th. At least that's the current schedule. That's the Starlink L26 mission. Yes, it's launching after this one, which is L27. It's a little confusing. It's not important. It's another Starlink mission launching from 39A on May 15th is the next one. Also, right now we're getting a very cool view of a lot of ice shedding from the plumbing and the stage 2 tanks as it enters its coast phase. That's pretty normal, and it's just catching the sunlight there. It looks kind of cool. Got some questions here that we can start running through again now that we have entered our coast phase. Lynn Wood asks, above the Merlin engine on the second stage, there appears to be something like a mylar balloon. What is inside of it and its purpose? So on that stage 2 view, which they just cut away from again, that is just some thermal protection, some thermal blankets that cover some of the plumbing components of the Merlin vacuum engine. So it's a thermal protection system component, effectively. There you can see it there, that reflective material above the engine bell. I want to thank a couple of super chats as well. Cameron Taylor, thank you so much. Says Godspeed Falcon 9. Appreciate the support. Purple Planet asking what were the differences in the new Raptor engines. So talking about some Starship development things. We know between the Raptor engines that were on some of the original Starship prototypes and the more recent ones, we know there were some upgrades there. I don't think we have a whole lot of details on them. We just know that they were upgraded for various reliability and other factors as well. And also a super chat here, Skate on Mars with the super chat. Appreciate the support. Frodo says, best birthday candle ever. Happy birthday there, Frodo. Appreciate the support. And Mark says, cannot believe this is becoming so routine. This is truly amazing. Appreciate the kind words there. Two Man with the new membership. Appreciate it. Musical Wool is asking, is that the first time there was a fire during landing? Don't recall the fire hoses after it landed. I saw the fire hoses activated. I don't know if I saw the actual fire. It's pretty common for the engine bay and for that area to have some residual flames right after landing. They go out pretty quickly. It's definitely not the first time we've seen those fire hoses on the drone ships activated either. I think that's just a safety precaution that gets activated pretty commonly.
All right. And guys, I am going to need to hand it back to you. We are starting to line up, and I've been given the signal that I should wrap up if we can. At least from my location here, not the stream.
Yep, Chris, you're clear to go. We're showing the SpaceX overlay right now, so you're good to pack up.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much, Michael, for hosting. Michael, I think you won the lottery in terms of who had the better time zone for this one.
Apparently I did, yes.
but maybe we will one day be able to swap, and you will be at Vandenberg watching Starlink's launch while Thomas and I handle some of the production side. But thank you so much to both of you for being on here with me, and thank you to everyone who watched from around the world. We're getting closer and closer to Starlink internet being a reality for about 80% of the surface of the Earth. So things are definitely progressing from that first operational flight that we had back in November of 2019. But that is going to do it just for me. I'm going to leave you with Thomas and Michael. I'm going to pack up our rig, head home, and get some sleep. So I will see you all later. Thank you so much. And Thomas and Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Chris, for heading out there again. That's Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor for NASA Spaceflight, out there at Cape Canaveral, covering our crewed camera out there. We're going to continue to some coverage here of today's launch. Again, we've got some time before the mission completes Stage 2 and its coast phase right now. Also, I've got a sneak preview of Julia's streak launch photo, which looks absolutely stunning. That will be on her social media coming up here. Julia, great shot.
I'm with you. Tweeting and talking is wow at this hour. It was a beautiful launch, you guys, and I hope you enjoy how the light plays on the water in this one.
It's an awesome shot. Luigi with the super chat says, "When NSF 4K?" Michael, any plans to make our stream in 4K?
I mean, do you want our stream to be on the same delay? I don't know, but it could be done. It's just I'm not sure it's worth latency, because our major thing is we like to have an interactive live stream with the chat. SpaceX, of course, is not able to do that, but when we increase latency, it makes it we're less responsive to the chat when we have more latency.
Right. We're already streaming in high definition anyway, so I think we're going to keep the interactive portion of our stream there. Appreciate the support.
I'm sure YouTube though will support low latency 4K at some point, and obviously more and more people are buying 4K monitors and whatnot, so it's definitely inevitable that at some point in the future we will go 4K.
Alright, well, with Stage 2 on its long coast phase here, headed towards the final burn and payload deployment, we've got our crew out in Cape Canaveral packed up, and we don't have any of our cameras left, as you can see Stage 2 actually approaching the United Kingdom right now. So we want to thank all the, I think we've cleared out most of the question queue and stuff. Actually, we just had one just come in. I guess I'll take this really quick. Are you guys sponsored by NASA, or how does that work? No, we're just named after NASA there. Appreciate the support there. But yeah, we are NASA Spaceflight covering today's launch. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that's going to wrap up our coverage of today's liftoff. Again, SpaceX will confirm the final parts of today's liftoff and payload deployment here in just under 40 minutes before payload deployment here. But that's going to do it for NASA Spaceflight's coverage of the record 10th flight of Falcon 9 Booster 1051. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for all the super chat and the membership support, and for just joining us and tuning in for today's launch. We had Chris Gebhardt out in the field. You heard him sign off earlier. We also had Julia Bergeron out in the field for photography. Julia, thanks so much for joining the live stream tonight.
And thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Absolutely. Michael Baylor handling production back in the studio. Michael, thank you as always.
For sure. Congrats to SpaceX on the historic first solid video downlink from the first stage as it landed on the drone ship. They have done that before for drone ship landings close to the shore, but never on a drone ship landing out of range from a ground station.
Awesome. And then, of course, my name is Thomas Burkhardt, writer for NASA Spaceflight. Thank you all so much for joining our live coverage of today's launch. Stay tuned to the SpaceX's outlets for the final portions of today's flight. But until next time, for more Boca Chica coverage, more SpaceX launch coverage, more launch coverage for things that are not SpaceX, anything cool happening in spaceflight, we'll have it here on the NASA Spaceflight channel and over at NASASpaceflight.com. So until next time, thank you all so much for joining us. See you next time.
Vehicle pressure looks good.
Falling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight downside of speed off. Speed off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.